Welcome to my second video on how we bring more of a flow state into our business setting when we have deadlines and clients and projects. How do we create a more flow state or make it easier for employees or ourselves to come into a flow state at work? So in the last video, you can go back and watch that, but I talked about why it's important to have a state of flow in our work and in our environment, and the flow triggers that enable this to happen. So this week we're going to talk about, the first one I'm going to talk about is having consistent feedback. In order to get into a flow and stay in a flow state, we need to have consistent feedback throughout the time that we are facing or working on our challenge or our goal. And the reason why is because our mind will tend to wander. So having feedback sort of course corrects us and keeps us on that path of where we want to go and keeps us focused. If you think about a surgeon, they have one of the highest flow rates because there's very specific feedback when they are in surgery. They can tell whether something has gone wrong or not. So they get this very effective feedback. If you think about artists, they sometimes, this idea of have this tortured artist. I think one of the reasons might be is that we have to create that feedback for ourselves. So there could be sort of more less straightforward feedback. So maybe if you're being more intuitive, you have something in your mind that tells you after each brush stroke, oh, this is good or this is bad, right? So we have to develop that within ourselves. So having this in the workplace, again, it comes back to communication with your employees. If you're a boss, you want to really figure out how to create this feedback for your employees. Having a once yearly feedback for people and review isn't very helpful, right? So how can you give them feedback weekly or monthly? And also, how much feedback do they need? People are all different, and I've noticed with my years of teaching that every single person needs different feedback. Some people have a lot of feedback appear, and they are able to go without a lot of feedback. Some other people need more feedback. So if you are a good manager, you are able to recognize that in your employees and see how you can help each one of them, communicate with them, and see what their needs are. If you are an employee or you're working for yourself, think about how you deal with feedback, what kind of feedback you need, what feedback means to you, what do you need in this project to be able to get this project done? What kind of feedback do you need? And really start to communicate that. If you're working for yourself, it might be a good idea to think about how you get feedback from yourself. Like I had that example of the artist. What does it mean if something is going your way or a good kind of direction or not so good? Maybe you have clients, you're getting feedback from clients or peers. There's a lot of different ways. If you're working for yourself, it can be a lot harder to get feedback. That's one of the things that I see with people working for themselves, but it is possible. And a lot of it, for me, it really comes from checking in with myself and am I aligning with my goals? Am I aligning with what my brand is really about, with who I am? So it's that course correction. So am I doing something that's out of alignment with who I am? I want to come back to this idea with flow that We have this goal or this challenge, but we're still open to all of the different ideas that come in when we're in the flow state and we can access our intuition. So, with business, I think it's really important to remain flexible, to have that goal, but also to see where you need to steer it when you need to make that course correction, right? So if you've ever had like some kind of goal and it felt like you were sort of like forcing it to happen, like you kept pushing, but it just wasn't happen. And then you had this idea like, oh, it should happen this other way, which is like a totally new way, right? So I want us to keep in mind that is part of this feedback where you are constantly sort of listening to yourself or to the feedback from clients and seeing really what's working, because with business, you don't want to keep doing the same thing that's not working, right? So that falls into the category of feedback. Now I want to talk about time and concentration. So one of the most essential parts of getting into flow is having concentration. And for this, we really need to evaluate how we're using our time throughout the day to enable us to really get into that most concentrated state. So when we're in flow, we're really at this heightened sense of concentration that enables us to access that intuition. And we want to be able to develop this concentration without worrying if we're going to be interrupted throughout the day, and really have a chunk of time to be able to dedicate to that. You really want to give your employees or yourself that time and structure your work around it. One of the hardest things when I worked in corporate was that we had our job to do, but we also had constant meetings, and meetings that we really didn't need to be in a lot of times. And so the structure of the work environment was not conducive to being creative at all, because we kept getting interrupted all the time and being forced to get out of that flow state. And it takes, I think it's like 10% that it takes away from your productivity when you have to kind of get out of that state. So thinking about how we can change the workplace to be more conducive to this type of concentration. When we're forcing employees or ourselves to be multitasking, it's really something that our brain doesn't do well. And we think it does, but it really doesn't. So when you are expecting employees to respond to emails really fast all the time, when they're going to meetings all the time, or you're demanding things of them to get them out of that flow state, it's really doing them a disservice. Think about your deadlines. Of course, there's so many times that we do have deadlines and we need to get things done right away, but are there any deadlines, like, are they arbitrary? Can you put this time, make it the priority for people instead of arbitrary deadlines, if there are any? Do you have employees that are more hardworking and they are able to structure things themselves? Can you loosen those bounds for them a little bit? So really, thinking also again about like who your employees are, and how you're able to create this structure for them. Think about the solution that you actually need. So there's a lot of times when we just need to get things done where we need a formula, and that's why formulas are great. I love them. But there's a lot of times where you actually want an innovative solution. You can't expect your team to come up with an innovative solution if they only have the time to do a formatted process. So think about what your end goal is. Is your end goal coming up with an innovative solution? Well, create more time for that. Create time for brainstorming. Create time for your employees and train them how to explore and open their brains up to their intuition in flow. This is a process that naturally happens and they're able to access that. So if you're able to show them that they are able to do that and give them space for it, it will work. But creating in your process, knowing what kind of solution you need is key. Find out from your employees what gets them in flow and how they're able to concentrate. And if you're working for yourself or you're working for a company, think about that yourself. If there's anything that's blocking you from being able to concentrate, talk to your manager. If you're working for yourself, block out specific time. This is really important if you're working for yourself too. Block at the beginning of the week, block out specific times that you're going to do specific things. And, that can be flexible too. So keep that in mind. But, don't answer emails, don't check your phone and Instagram. Just try to focus on what you're doing for a certain amount of time. And a lot of times it'll be a smaller amount of time because you're really in flow and able to access it. Schedule breaks. So for me, I've mentioned this before, but I like to, give myself a question and then take breaks, like take a walk or take some time just to daydream. So a lot of people now have sort of break rooms where people can take naps. This just really helps your brain to be able to absorb all that information and synthesize it into something, and then those ideas will start to come. So schedule in those times for breaks and for the flow of that information and that intuition just to come in. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. In the next week's video, I'm gonna talk about autonomy and having control in your workplace. So look forward to talking with you about that. I hope these videos are helping you in your work, and stay tuned for more. Thanks.